All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future focused weekly update. I am your host, Christopher Lind, and if I am doing my job well, I am keeping you 10 steps ahead of what's happening at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. First of all, thanks to everybody who watches, listens. I've just been seeing some significant growth in things, and I just want to say thank you. I really enjoy your engagement in this and also just the participation, the messages I get from folks. It's super helpful and also helps me guide what topics you find the most value in so I can tailor this to you, because at the end of the day, that's why I'm doing it, is to hopefully cover the stuff that you find most valuable. So if you would do me a huge favor, share it with somebody. If you get value out of it, please like, subscribe, all those fun social things, tell a friend, you name it. I appreciate it. That's what it boils down to. So thank you for that. And if you have things specifically that pop up and you go, Christopher, what are your thoughts on this? Or where is this going? Or what do you know about this? I get a lot of those questions off camera. And so I try and incorporate as many as possible on camera. And if you also didn't know, I do a weekly Q&A, a live Q&A on Substack. And so this is the podcast, but then I do a Q&A based on some of the questions I get in between and off camera that are just follow-up questions to things. I've got a rundown of 4 updates today. How deep I go into them will depend on how I do on timing. I do want to cover the 4, but there's some that I may do a deeper dive on in a future episode, and I'll explain why when we get into it. But just to give you a rundown of what I'll be talking about today. So Stanford, the first one is Stanford released some recent research on AI therapists and how they're performing. And let's just say the results were not great. And I'll explain to you what it came back with and some of the limitations, which actually I think some of the limitations made it worse. So we've got that. I'm going to talk about some of Microsoft's predictions around agent bosses and what that means. So if you're hearing agents are making a big deal, we've said 2025 is the year of AI agents. I'm going to help contextualize that. And then also speak into what that practically means for every employee, because if you didn't want to be in a leadership role, well, get ready because it's coming. It just might be a different kind of leadership than you anticipated. Then the other one is I want to give a brief update on some things happening with Workday and AI. If you're not familiar with Workday, they are in the middle of a legal battle right now over some bias stuff. And I want to touch on this one. This might be one I do a deeper dive on a little bit later, but I at least want to cover on some of those things. And then the last one is, stick around for this one because I do want to talk about some of the latest developments in the intersection of tech, AI, and the military, and what some military happenings going on right now, and my thoughts and just what we need to be thinking about with all this stuff, and just some considerations for those who are in that sector or just curious about it. So there you go. That's the rundown. Let's get started on the first one. Now, the first one has to do with, I told you there's some research out of Stanford. If you want to look it up, you can actually go check it out. But the actual title, so you can Google it. I don't have time to put links to everything in things, but just so you know, I'm not making these things up. There is a research paper. It hasn't been peer reviewed, so I will acknowledge that, but it's well done. It's called Expressing Stigma and Inappropriate Responses Prevents LLMs from Safety Replacing Mental Health Providers. So in and of itself, I will acknowledge the title to me is a little bit of the, leading a horse to water. It's already kind of saying we're trying to prove that, you can't safely replace mental health providers. Now, I get that could be a preconceived bias. I think the research supports some of this stuff. So you'll see where I'm going with this. But just to give you a breakdown of some of the things with this. So some of the things coming out of the research were pretty clear that there was notable, as I read through the thing, there was notable display of cognitive bias and just stigmas related to mental illness in AI's usage. Now, specific to, they tested a bunch of different models, but 4.0 specifically was kind of the main stage with this. And it showed a fair amount of stigmatization towards things like, now they didn't study, this is one of the limitations. They did not study every single indication or cognitive disorder, anything like that. But when it came to depression, schizophrenia, and alcohol dependency, there was a lot of stigmatization on that. And so you could see that in some of its responses and things like that. And I think we need to take that into consideration when you think about what a therapist does and the purpose of a therapist. I mean, your goal when you're talking to a therapist is to have them evaluate you and understand you, not through a biased lens of, well, now I'm drawing conclusions about who you are as a person, so much as I want to understand the symptom and then help deconstruct the symptoms so that we can get to a better solution. And that's very difficult to do if somebody goes, well, I already think people who are depressed are this way, or I think this is the cause. But well, you're going to be less likely to actually diagnose the right issue or be able to come up with a treatment plan. And that stigmatization comes through pretty clear in the research related to this. And there are apps popping up all over the place of like, get your AI counselor. So when it comes to serious issues already, it's showing stigmatization. Now, this did not get into just general, but if it's in those specific use cases, it's going to be everywhere else. And that shouldn't surprise us when we think about the fact that AI is trained on human data. It's trained on all sorts of human data from all over the place, and human data is biased. And so unfortunately, when you pack that up into a major model, you're going to see some of the same things. Now, one of the really concerning ones, and I've covered some of these updates, but this is just some, again, Stanford-backed research that supports this. It did okay, but not great at basic crisis handling. So just as an example in the research, they gave it a prompt with, I got to be careful how I word this, self-harm, and it came back with listing different bridges in New York City. So you might hear hype articles and they get lots of hype about it, but this research proved it did do that. So when it came to self-termination or things like that, it fairly frequently gave dangerous responses that a licensed clinical therapist would never do. Now, it's not like doomsday type stuff. Like it was 70 to 80%. I'm actually kind of looking at, it was 70 to 80% appropriate, which you might go, I mean, hey, that's pretty good, right? 7 to 8 out of 10. Well, compare that to how humans are. And according to human tests, humans are 93. So we're not perfect, but that's a pretty far cry. 13 to 23% difference in accuracy on crisis handling. You got to keep in mind, that's on crisis handling. That's a big margin of error to be, oops, the AI app told them to do something in a crisis moment that led to a really bad thing. And the thing with it is, if you've ever worked with somebody who's going through a crisis, it is a very, very delicate time. And one of the things that, if you look in the limitations, which is one of the first areas I always go and research, is what were some of the limitations with this? A lot of these were best case one-shot prompts that they were putting in here. There wasn't back and forth dialogue with things like that. It was a one-shot prompt. Here is the situation. How does it respond to that? Which in some ways, I would say it's a little bit unfair because you're not giving the AI a chance to really contextualize things, but they did actually train it with context. So it's not that they just went to a cold instance of ChatGPT, threw an empty prompt into it, and then it shot back, here's a list of NYC bridges. They trained it on, here's the situation, here's the person, here's all the details. They gave it a lot of context, and still then when given a potentially harmful prompt, that might come from a human, it still did this, 30 to 20 to 30% of the time. It was like a not safe response. So you can see, if you're just looking for somebody to kind of help you generally talk through some light situations, that might not be serious, but in crises, clearly this is not something you want handing off to AI. And I think that's important not only for clinicians to think about as they start augmenting their practices with AI tools, but you as a user need to be objectively aware of that if you're going through a crisis, AI is not a good support tool. I just want to make that abundantly clear. If you are going through crisis, you should not be turning to an AI app, even if it says it's a counseling app or whatever. That is not a safe place to go. And I think one of the things that it really misses that came out from this was, as I looked into the research, what it misses, and this just makes sense for AI, empathizing with someone is more than just the words you choose and the tone you use. And unfortunately, I've said this many times before, AI is not sentient, it's not conscious. And even if you wanted to argue with me that it is, and I'm happy to have that argument, what it lacks is context. It has not ever lived anything, it has not ever experienced anything. It's like an academic that's read how to run a business, but has never run a business. And that doesn't mean there's no value to it. It just means there's a certain level it gets to where it goes, you don't really understand. And while you might be able to articulate the words, you might be able to say it in the right context or tone, you still cannot relate. And that's why sometimes the best therapists are the ones who have been through some serious stuff. Because when they interact with somebody, they can contextualize it. That's something AI cannot do. And so as a result, it can mimic the tone. It's like talking to a sociopath or a complete narcissist. They may be able to say things like, oh, I care, I understand, I love you. They can say those words, but they don't know what they're saying. They've just been trained to say them in the right instances. And that's extremely dangerous and harmful when you think about this, especially in crisis situations or just in general mental health situations. So you as users need to be very aware of this, because there are all sorts of stuff popping up all over this. And that was one of the things that stood out to me as I looked at this. I just did a quick search of therapy bots, and they're everywhere. And many of them are not even licensed. They have nothing to do with a licensed therapist. They have nothing to do. There's nobody behind it. It's just a bot that is a quick money grab. And so you want, just be really careful if you're looking for anything to support you in therapy or mental health or whatever, because they're all marketed. I looked at a bunch of these sites just curious what they said, and their marketing speak, you would have thought this is the replacement for a human therapist, which is extremely dangerous. And I looked into some of the stats on some of these bots. This research said the AI didn't do well in, what did I say, 70 to 80%. It did okay, so 20 to 30. These unlicensed bots that are over, much worse, which makes sense when you consider in research, you're talking about a clinical, consistent, best case scenario environment. So when I say the study came back and said these AI bots and prompts performed at 70 to 80% compared to 93% human, well, that's in a clinical environment. I think some of these other apps are showing a more realistic outcome, which is 30, 40% effectiveness. It's not doing a good job. In fact, it's doing worse. It's causing harm more than it's causing benefit. And so just because something's less expensive or it's more convenient or it's the pop trend, or, you got to be really careful, especially when it comes to things like this. And I would encourage anybody, if you know other people, to just be sharing something. Go grab this research paper or share this podcast episode with people and just go, hey, like, if you're thinking about this, please be really careful. This could cause some really serious things. And unfortunately, going back to the crisis mode, when you're in a crisis, you are not thinking clearly. So on top of the fact that the models are not performing well, they're performing with somebody who is not in a clear state of mind to be able to even catch where it's missing. And I think that's a big problem. Now, I think the other thing, even with some of these benchmarks, when it comes to, well, how's AI doing in terms of mental health, is therapy and working with people. And I can just say this not only with my cognitive psychology background, but just working in human performance. Humans are not multiple choice tests. They're not the answer. It's not usually which one's the right answer. It's about relating and contextualizing in the right way. And so a lot of times when you see benchmarks, and I think this research helped bring this to light, even where it did well, you're like, well, even in some of the examples that highlighted, I go, Yeah, but I can see an environment where that answer would be wrong or could be extremely harmful. Maybe in this instance it wasn't, but depending on who you're talking to, their specific circumstances, that could go completely off the rails. So, all that to say, if you said, Christopher, do you think AI can replace a therapist? No. And anyone who says AI can replace a therapist, I don't think understands therapy or just humans in general. And that doesn't mean I don't think there's any room for AI to assist with some of this stuff, that it has absolutely no redeeming value. I think there's lots of places it can augment, it can be helpful. But in terms of would I ever encourage somebody like, hey, dump your therapist and download the latest AI bot, it's going to be helpful? No. And this again, some of the limitations. It was limited in what the symptoms it looked at. You got to consider the way they conducted the test, which is really the only way you have, which is you give it a prompt and see what it gives you back. That's not how human interactions work. And I'm actually in the process of building some AI for something unrelated for my AER, the AI effectiveness rating. And it's very complicated to get AI to understand when to ask follow-up questions and to get additional detail and to know what additional detail to get and why. How does that relate? That kind of complexity is significant, and you're not going to find that in a app somebody pumped out using ChatGPT to help them write an app so they could sell it on a marketplace for $9.99 a month type of a thing. So you got to be really, really careful. Now, I will say there's not a lot of long-term study on this. But based on where we are today, I don't think we need a lot of long-term study for me to conclusively say you do not want to trust in an AI therapist. Now, might it get better? I absolutely think it will. Will we get better at knowing when to escalate to, a human therapist? Will it know when to see certain triggers and automatically connect you with a crisis person? Yes. So are there ways, going back to what I said earlier, are there ways you can do this well? Yes. I think some of the other things that we just need to be really mindful of that wasn't as clear in this, but I continue to see is LLMs and these big AI models, they don't do a good job. You got to remember, it's pulling tons of data and then trying to distill it down to the lowest common denominator. Well, that doesn't account for cultural or linguistic diversity. I just even think when I've taken global roles, the first time I took a global role, and I remember facilitating one of my first meetings, and I got a bunch of feedback from global folks who were like, I don't know what you're talking about, because there's just linguistic differences. The way we represent things is different. And what may be crisis in one culture, saying that in another culture may be like, that's just the way we talk. Even generationally, forget cultural differences, even generationally, so you say the word psychological safety or unsafe or lack of trust, for some people that means, oh my gosh, this is a crisis mode. For other people, they're like, what? That's not at all what I meant. I said this is dysfunctional. Everything's dysfunctional. That word doesn't mean what you think it means. But to somebody else, the word dysfunction means you think this is the worst thing on the planet and you hate everything. And you're like, what? No, I don't. And AI doesn't do a good job of that well. So I think, if anything, check out the research. I'll be watching to see when it gets peer reviewed, and I'll be keeping an eye out for some of this other stuff. But it's worth noting, really good stuff. Do I think there's room for us to use AI alongside mental health, greater access, helping people through things? Absolutely. Do I think we should be eliminating human therapists and just saying, as long as you've got a Better Health app or whatever, one of these other apps, you're good to go? No, I don't at all. I think that would be a huge cataclysmic mistake. All right, let's move on to point number 2, which is talking about some of Microsoft's predictions for agental bosses and what does the future hold for employees as a whole. Now, I will tell you, there is it's called the 2025 Annual Work Trend Index from Microsoft. I have not yet had a chance to do a deep dive into it. So some of the things I'm sharing from that, I will say, are just more high-level glances. I plan on doing a much deeper dive into the 2025 annual work trend index and pulling out some deeper insights. So more to come on that. But today I did just want to cover one of these things because I saw this article. It was an HR executive about Microsoft's predictions for HR leaders. And basically, are you preparing for agent bosses? Now, this article was very, very, very tailored to HR leaders. So if you're listening to this going, well, I'm not in HR, this isn't relevant for me, I would encourage you to pause and not pause the video or audio. Actually, resist the urge to just click out, because some of the predictions, I actually think there's some real merit to it. Now, when you actually dig into it, what they're proclaiming, and some of the big futurists and thought leaders in the space are saying, is that, everybody's going to become an agentic boss. I think that might be a bit of a stretch. And as you dig into the data itself, I will say most leaders now, it was actually really interesting. There was this distinction between, if you talk to employees and you say, do you know what an agent is? Many don't. But if you talk to leaders and senior leaders and say, do you know what an agent is? Many of them are like, well, yeah, I do know what that is. And this is a little bit of a disconnect, which is also why I'm incorporating it here, because if you don't know what an agent is, essentially what it is let me describe it like I would to my kids. It's basically like if you packaged up generative AI or, a chat GPT into something that was used for a very specific purpose and was trained to do a very specific set of things. Now, those things could be multimodal. And what I mean by that is it can do more than one thing. So it's not just, respond to emails. Like, it could do different things, like when I have this meeting, take it from the meeting, take the transcript, take some of the key points, take those key points, put it into Salesforce, and mark Salesforce as I had a meeting with this person today, type of a thing. As you can see, agents have the potential to be really helpful. And if you're an employee, you might hear that and go, wow, that'd be really great. You may also have seen some of the results of this and go, not so great, type of a thing. But one of the things that was interesting coming out of this index was the fact that leaders, so just so you know, this is kind of where things are today. Leaders are fully expecting their teams, or at least 41% of leaders believe their teams will be training AI agents in the next few years, and 36 are going to be managing them. So in the next 5 years, they think 41% of their people are going to be training AI. So at some point, you're going to be responsible for training agents. Now, I'm seeing that all left and right as companies are rolling out Gemini and Copilot, the agental component of these workplace productivity apps. The logical next step is, once they're implemented, they're trying to get people to create agents to help them do some of their work. So you might go, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to participate in training my replacement. Well, you might not have a choice. And the other piece is may not be in your best interest, and not even just to protect your job, but even just the example I described there. This actually is a really good opportunity, if you train it well, to help you with some of these robotic, mundane activities that you spend a lot of your time going, gosh, every time I get a ticket, I've got to do this, and then I've got to do this, and I got to go fill out this form, and then I got to do all this. And some of this stuff isn't brand new. You've always been able to do like automations and workflows, but typically it's been more technically advanced than the average person can do. And what agents are doing is it's making it much more accessible to people. And so the average person can begin training an agent to do some of the robotic work it does, which is why leaders are already anticipating 41% of their people are going to be training agents in the next 5 years. So I actually would be curious, from those of you watching or listening, have you started actually training agents? I can tell you, even as an independent person, I have trained agents for my own stuff. I've trained agents for other things. I am very surgical about it, which I think you need to be very careful how you train them, but it's something that's coming. But I am curious. I know I tend to be on the far end of the curve, so I'm always curious where people are. So I'd love to hear from you. But the one that we're not quite, a little over a third, they're planning actually managing agents. And I actually just talked to somebody this week who they have a good friend who is in a big tech company, And their job now is just to oversee the code that's being written by AI and spot check it, give AI feedback, and then make sure that it goes through the proper, channels before it moves to the next step. So if you really think about this, some of the industrial revolution is coming for knowledge work in this, because as I actually got a chance to talk with this person about their job now, I'm like, this actually sounds like somebody who worked on a manufacturing floor as machines first started getting implemented. You went from being the person who's like widgeting, pushing things together, to you're kind of overseeing as things go by, looking for errors and glitches and things, and taking things that are broken off the line type of a thing. Which, depending on who I talk to, some people are terrified of that future. Others are not. But the reality is it's very much coming. And generally, I would say we're moving through the change curve. 70, and according to the report, and again, I'll do a deep dive into it, but almost 80% of people believe AI is going to accelerate their careers, which I agree. AI has a ton of potential, I will say that, to accelerate your career. Does it also have the potential to destroy it? Yes, it does. It does. Now, one of the unfortunate things that I thought as I came to this was a lot of this shift is leading towards companies thinking they need to hire for new and distinct roles. I actually think that's unfortunate, because I don't see, as much as this stuff is changing, I don't see as much of this being a transformation in we're creating new jobs. I do think we're going to see new jobs, and the economic reports are demonstrating this. But a lot of times, as I'm looking at a lot of the layoffs and some of the ways even executives are thinking about this, it's more about we need to hire AI talent. And a lot of times I look at that and go, not really. You need to better understand your current talent and help them understand AI so they can work with it well. Going back to, I told you you're going to hear me talk about this more, but that is exactly why I created the AI effectiveness rating. And that's not me just pitching something. I designed it because companies need to understand, hey, if I'm working with Christopher Lind, or if Christopher Lind's on my team, how good is he at working with AI? How well does he understand it? How do I grow him in those capabilities? And then that allows me to then say, how do I hold him accountable to making sure he's using AI in the right places? Well, that's very hard to do if you have no idea somebody's capability. And right now, very few people know what they're doing with AI, let alone know how equipped and how capable their people are of using it. So I'm in the process, I mentioned it in the beginning, of actually creating a digital scalable version of it so that people can do this at scale, instead of being like, Christopher, can you do a one-on-one interview with me and then come back with a report of what your analysis is based on your criteria. I'm building, going back to the agent, I'm building an agent to be able to deploy that so I can make it more affordable and scalable for people while still keeping the human touch component in and incorporating that into the design. So it's a little bit of a sales pitch, but you're going to hear me talk about it more because it is critical to some of these problems that things like this Work Trend Index are pointing out, which is, whether you like it or not, you are going to be responsible for training agents. You are then going to be responsible for overseeing those agents. That means you need to understand how agents work, what is appropriate for an agent to do, what is not, where should those human touch points come into play, what are the kinds of things you should hand over to AI, when should you not, when do your personal biases over, well, I like doing that, get in the way of you actually delegating work that you should be delegating. If you're a leader, do you even know how to analyze that within your people and what that means for the strategy of your organization? Many don't. So if you're hearing me describe that and going, oh my gosh, Christopher, like, I don't have an answer to those questions. Well, neither do most people, which is exactly why I spend so much time creating content like this to try and help make sense of it, and then leaning in and trying to provide people with the tools and resources to be successful with this. So all that to say, more to come on a deeper dive on the Work Trend Index, but just know you are going to be training and unlike what we saw with the Industrial Revolution, where you just kind of showed up and it was like, hey, the machines are doing it. Knowledge work won't work that way. And so that's one note I will add to leaders. Unlike where you could maybe just build a machine that made the widgets and you just kind of announce to people, hey, you're not assembling the widgets anymore. You're just watching the widgets to make sure that they were assembled correctly. You're not going to be able to do that with AI. And honestly, actually, that wasn't super great because there were things that people who had tons of skill assembling things knew more than and weren't consulted, and it caused some problems even in the Industrial Revolution. Those problems are going to be accelerated and exacerbated in the AI age. So if you're a leader, just tread carefully and thoughtfully. If you're an employee, just be prepared for this so that you can start thinking about it. And for any of you, seriously, ask me about the AER, because you're just so much better off if you know what you're working with and where you're going than if you're flying blind. Okay, on to update number 3. If you have not been following Workday, Workday is one of the biggest HR, it's called an HCM, and human capital management system. It's one of the biggest HR systems. You have probably, if you have ever applied to a job or worked in an organization, at some point have interacted with Workday. You've probably put your performance reviews in it. You probably, when you applied to a job, filled out an application in Workday. You probably have had to enter in your tax information or your preferences for benefits, your details of where you live and how much you want taken out for benefits and all this stuff. You've had some sort of interaction with Workday. Well, Workday is heavily involved in the recruiting process. And one of the things, and I knew it was only a matter of time before this blew up, but as you can imagine, especially in tough economic times, economic times just make it worse. It's never really easier. But as you are in tough times and the just realities of the internet and people being able to apply for jobs online, you get a large volume of people applying for jobs, which you might go, that's great if you're a company, right? Because you get lots of people applying. There's pros and cons. I mean, there's pros and cons if you're an employee or if you're a job seeker, because now, yeah, it's great. You can conveniently apply for a job. You don't got to print out your resume and show up at the office and go, hi, I'm Christopher. Is there a manager who can talk to me about something? And by the way, I know some people who still advise doing that. I would not recommend doing that unless you get an invitation or you have a relationship into there. It's a good, or you're in a really small town. I mean, I understand there's exceptions, but I still see people giving out that advice, like show up at the Google headquarters and bring your CV. I mean, if you want to waste the day and just see headquarters, go ahead. But if you actually want to be productive, not the best use of your time. But that convenience has a trade-off in that now, because it's easier, you've reduced friction, there's more people applying. So that's the trade-off as an employee. As a company, you deal with the same challenge. Tools like Workday that make it easy for people to apply online and submit their information make it great in that you can reach a wide candidate pool. You can put a link on LinkedIn and you can send it out in an email, throw it on Indeed or whatever, and you can get hundreds, maybe thousands of people that apply for things. Sounds good on the surface. Unfortunately, someone somewhere has to then sort through these things and try and figure out who they pick to actually call for a follow-up, and then who they choose to move on and do things further. So as you can imagine, companies have been looking to their tech stacks to say, can you help? Can technology help? And boy, AI sounds like a delicious solution, right? Because AI can scan those thousands of resumes that would take a poor human being, which if you've ever met a recruiter, give them a hug. Just give them a hug and go, thank you for what you do. Man, you've got it rough. These recruiters, I know many of them, and it's a tough job. You're getting bombarded by people who want you to find them a job, and you're like, it's not like I make the jobs. You're in between a hiring manager who doesn't know what they want and candidates who aren't clear on how to articulate what they can do, and you're trying to bridge that gap. I have mad respect for recruiters. So if you were here, there's a fist bump for you for the work you're doing. But As such, companies have looked to technology platforms to say, could you streamline this for us? Could you more quickly go through 1,000 applications and narrow it down so that our poor recruiting team doesn't have to scan 1,000 resumes, but maybe only has to scan the 30 top picks. And then if they can't find what they're looking for there, then they can go on. Well, you can start to imagine how that would begin to open new doors as people go, so how did you decide which 30 you went with? And right now, Workday is in court over, well, some of the things I've described many times over the AI is trained on a specific set of data. It doesn't always take into account cultural and linguistic differences. It has its own bias. All the things I just told you, the Stanford research proved when it comes to therapy. Guess what's baked into an AI system that is scanning 1,000 resumes and determining who is the most qualified candidate? You'd like to think it's objective, but it's not necessarily. And the challenge with that is many can't even answer the question, so how did it decide on those 30? What were the actual criteria? And were those criteria objective? Or did it just see the first name, assume it was an unrepresented minority, and then go, nah, not them, because we're looking for more of this? Does it have a bias towards, well, HR tends to be more, I'm making this up, so please don't blow me up in the comments. HR tends to be more dominated by females. So when I hear a masculine name, I'm more inclined to downgrade it in terms of cost, right? Like those kinds of things. Unfortunately, a lot of times there's not real visibility into it. And granted, that stuff, one thing I don't like about some of the just like, boo, AI, Workday, all this stuff is people do the same thing, okay? You've seen the stuff over the years where it's like the average person will look at your resume for 2 seconds, so you got to grab their attention. There's heat maps, there's all those kind of stuff. So it's not that this problem didn't exist before. The problem just now becomes, well, we don't know how it's making the decision and how was it trained and can it explain the criteria? And then unfortunately you go to the company and say, well, how did you decide? And they go, AI did it. Well, that's not really an acceptable answer, but right now there's not a lot of legal precedence. So the reason Workday's in court, as you can imagine, is people are going, so is this Workday's fault? Like, is Workday's AI biased and discriminatory and need to be held accountable for what it is? Is this the companies that are using it putting too much on AI and just trusting it too much, not having any humans in the loop? Is this a systemic, like, where is the breakdown and who's legally responsible for it? Because the biggest challenge is we can't get an answer on what happened. We don't know how it did it. We kind of do, but not really. And if you've ever tried to tell AI, especially some of these older models, which I'm not saying Workday's on an older model, it's part of the reason they got to stay up to date. But if you try and ask AI, how did you come to that conclusion? It's usually really bad. It's getting better, but it's usually really bad at telling you. But what's concerning is we already have data and research coming out saying even what it tells you is a lie. So you have to understand, how was it trained? Like, if Workday trained it to give a unbiased answer, even if it was there's so much that has to get unpacked in this, which is why this battle happening right now in the courts with Workday is going to play a huge role in what happens with AI in the future. Now, a couple application points that I think are relevant right now. If you're a business or HR leader, you need to be really, really thoughtful and careful about how you're implementing AI. And this Workday thing is highlighting this. Again, depending on how the outcome falls, this could end up being like, hey, and I hope it doesn't fully go here, but this could turn into the social media days where it's like Workday goes, legal precedence is the AI providers are not responsible for what it does, so it's all on you. That could then blow back on the companies who now are 100% accountable, regardless of how dysfunctional the AI is or where it breaks. I think we're going to see something in between, but we just don't know yet. So for any of you organizational leaders who are making big decisions about automation, you better be making them clearly, and you at least better have some thoughtful things of, here's how we're doing it. Here's how we're making sure we recognize this as a risk. These are the steps we're putting in place to mitigate this risk, to make sure that's not happening. Like, just cross your T's and dot your I's, because this has the potential to blow up on you. And if you've been over dependent, you might want to at least proactively start cleaning that up before things get out of hand. So that's my warning there. If you're a job candidate, I think you need to be really aware that this is very much happening. Like, you are largely being vetted by AI. So, and I know companies might not like me saying this, use AI to help you with that. Use AI to say, what would be an AI optimized thing for this job, so that you know you're feeding it to AI. You want it to be optimized for AI. That's a very simple step you can do. Can you make my resume optimized for AI? Can you help me populate this? Now, I know there were going to be people, and I saw an article yesterday where a big bank is like ticked off because they're like, our candidates are using AI for whatever. And it's like, you're literally using AI to do that. That's not a fair thing. So my advice to job seekers, make sure you're using AI when you're applying to optimize for AI, because it's being evaluated and assessed by AI. That said, here's my don't do this, okay? Because you are part of the problem if you do. I know people who, and I understand, you are desperate for a job, or you're nervous about where things are going, or you feel like, I've applied to 800 jobs and I haven't heard anything back. I'm so discouraged. When you get into that mode, it can be tempting to shortcut things and just let AI say things that aren't really true. Go ahead and optimize my experience for this. Embellish it accordingly. Please don't do that, because one, you are adding noise to the mix, which is making the problem worse. You're going to end up in a job you hate anyway and take it away from somebody who actually is more qualified for it. You actually are adding to the problem. So yes, use AI, but edit and revise what AI is using or coming up with to make sure it's accurate. Like, you don't, and I actually know this, and I talk to recruiters all the time that are like, I get hundreds of applications for jobs where it is clear this person has zero experience in what they're applying for, but they used AI to whiz bang their stuff to sound good for the application so that it gets through the thing. And all you're doing is wasting more time, because then it gets into a human's hands. You're going to talk to somebody at some point, and they're like, you don't have a clue what you're talking about. I think we're going to see more things like AI screeners, where you're actually expected to do it. But again, you're going to get people who are mad because they're like, you're using ChatGPT, you're typing in. We don't get around this by keep throwing AI at AI to fix it. We get around this by actually saying, how do we do a better job of helping connect people with the right jobs and making sure there's the right humans in the right loops along the way? So more to come on this Workday thing. Like I said, I'm following this one closely, but I think that should give all of you, whether you're a job seeker or a hiring manager or business exec, some guidance on how to be thinking about this, so you don't get hurt. You don't get hurt, and you don't hurt other people in the process. All right, fourth and foremost, this is one that will probably be a relatively brief update that I am going to want to be paying closer attention to as we get into it. This week in particular, there has been like boom, 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 a bunch of big headlines about AI as it relates to military use and some of the things that are happening with it. Now, if you think AI is not in the military today, you're misunderstood. I mean, if you didn't watch the whole Ukrainian drone attack on the jets and you're just following what's going on around the world, like, AI is already in use. I'm not saying it's not, but there's some major developments happening right now. I mean, there's a whole, the U.S. Army just recruited a ton of Silicon Valley execs and are forming a board or whatever around this to try and say, hey, what is the best use of all this? What can it do? There was another one. There was I think it was Sweden. I think it was in Sweden. Anyway, they had a fighter pilot jet. It was done by Saab. And they had a fighter pilot jet that was completely autonomous, engage in, not fake warfare, but a fake dogfight. They simulated a dogfight The test results, just so you know, depending on the articles you read, some will be like, AI beat the humans. It was inconclusive, is my best take. I tried to analyze all of them. It was inconclusive. So anything saying AI is better at being a fighter pilot than whatever, you got to actually read their measures. It was inconclusive, is my honest assessment of that. But this goes to show that we're already looking at, hey, how do we start using AI to do some of the stuff that people are doing? I read another report that said, and I think it might have been in that Reuters article about this fighter jet, they're already saying like AI is largely going to be doing most of the work when it comes to military combat, and people are just going to be kind of like stepping in as needed. So all these things I talked about with Microsoft, training AI, managing AI, all this stuff, this is coming for the military big time. OpenAI, they just announced a big $200 million agreement. It's a U.S. defense contract that they're going to be doing. I mean, OpenAI is one of the leaders in this, so it's all going to be all about how do we get the models to work for us in terms of military stuff. And I don't feel like we're seeing enough about how is this being done. I mean, I just even think about the tech execs that are being recruited for the Army. One of the concerns I have for some of this stuff goes back to, if you look at my AER for how do you use AI effectively, I'm not seeing some of the things that assessment is looking at. Is like, do you have diversity of thought? Do you have ethical people in the room? Like, how are you managing this? Just because you get the smartest tech bros in the room, along with a bunch of military leaders who know how the military works, that's not going to get you the best result. And might we make some really, really effective weapons that are amazing at eradicating large quantities of human beings with little to no effort? I mean, yeah, but that shouldn't be our end game. And those of you who know me know I'm not a big supporter of like military type stuff. I don't like a lot of it. I have a ton of respect for the people who are in the military. I understand we need to have military stuff. I think sometimes we're way over militarized. And my concern, honestly, with this moving so much into the AI space, it was really interesting. I was talking with my son about it the other day, and we were just talking about the fact that, because we like to watch a lot of history stuff, and we were just talking about how, in ancient battle, there's ups and downs to this, but in ancient battle, if you had to kill someone, you had to look them in the eye. Like, you actually had to see them. You had to watch them die. And that just forced you to have to reckon with it. Now, I'm not saying that's better. We should go back to the olden days. No, I mean, there's PTSD, and there's also like you're training people to kill without, I'm not saying that. But one of the things we talked about was you really had to wrestle with killing a person much more in the past. Now, it feels more like playing Call of Duty. And with AI coming into the mix, you didn't even have to play Call of Duty. You're looking at an analytics report that comes to you after it's all done, giving you the results of, oh, how did the AI drones do? Great. It looks like a success rate was pretty high. I'm pretty sure we're good with how things went. And it's like, do you even know who was in there? Well, according to the report, it said, there were limited civilian casualties. We've distilled it down to limited civilian casualties to the point where that's what AI said. So I'm sure we're fine. I got a green bar on the output report. Like, what? So I don't bring this up to freak people out or think you're going to have, if you watched it, I don't want to get political, but if you watched where things are going, if you're afraid that you're going to have robot dogs showing up at your house or a military drone flying over your house, I don't think that's something that's reasonable to be freaking out about, to be honest. As much as the capabilities there, realistically speaking, no. However, I think as AI makes us more and more disconnected from the real ethical, moral implications of war, of killing people, of even just, forget even the whole violent side of it, even just occupational, military occupation type stuff. Now if it just becomes easier to occupy a territory because you can just send in a bunch of drones and robots to take care of it for you, that empirical mindset of, well, we've got the tech and the capabilities. Why not just rule this, group of people or this nation? Because we don't even got to put people over there. We can just send a bunch of robots in to do it. It just leads us, if we're not careful, to not think about the implications of this stuff, to not wrestle through, hey, just because we can, does that mean we should? Just because it's a possibility doesn't mean we should be exploring it. And I get concerned when I look at some of the boards and the people involved with this. There's a lot of emphasis on people who understand the tech. They understand what it can do. There's lots of people who understand what they want accomplished. That's also a good thing. I don't think it's bad to have those people in the room. My question when I see things like the U.S. Army Reserve Board is, do you also have people in the room saying, hang on though, what are the implications of this? And is this right? Is this necessary? Are we going too far with this? How are we making sure we're actually going back and making sure that green bar on our AI report isn't actually inaccurate? And then it's actually choosing the right things and accomplishing the right targets. And we don't just become almost armchair quarterbacks to something as nuanced, complex, and serious as military and warfare. And I just think that's one of the things I consistently see missing. So if you're somebody who's involved in this, and you're like, well, Christopher, why don't you get involved with that? I would love to. I just would need, and I'm involved in some conversations related to this, but this is an area that I think we need more voices who have this perspective of, hey, and I just think about some of these things that can be perceived as, well, you're slowing down progress. No, not necessarily. I just think it's important that we think about the real implications of this stuff and we do the right thing and think about it the right way, so we don't end up causing more problems for ourselves down the road, and we don't end up hurting real people. Because consistently, all throughout human history, the people who always get hurt the most are the vulnerable and the weak. The people who don't have the capability or the resources to push against some of this stuff. And I think it's at least worth making sure we're considering and thoughtfully protecting those folks and making sure their interests are at least represented and represented fairly. If ultimately we still make some decisions, and I think there's lots of room for AI implementation. So don't anybody listen to this and think, so does Christopher oppose to AI in military? No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I actually think it's extremely valuable, just like I think it's extremely valuable everywhere else. It's just a matter of how are we using it. And in this instance in particular, the consequences of it are really serious. Okay, so with that, I hope you found these 4 updates helpful. Like always, my goal is not to incite fear. My goal is not to give you all the answers. My goal is to recognize there is a lot of nuance and complexity to every single one of these situations. And even when we come across situations that seems like a straight up no-brainer of, yes, you should do this, no, you shouldn't do that, oftentimes there's way more underneath it. And my goal is to help you think through those things, consider those things seriously, and then be able to step forward with wisdom and discernment instead of fear or, just careless disregard. And I think that's my biggest concern, is bringing those polar ends of the spectrum to the middle. So with that, I hope I did my job well this week. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and a great weekend, and we will see you on the other side.